This episode of The Minimalists is brought to you by nobody, because advertisements suck.
The Minimalists.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn. Ryan Nicodemus is on vacation, but fear not. I'm here with nonprofit CEO Sheila Morovati. Sheila, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Well, today, we're going to talk about waste. We're going to talk about all the ways in which we are wasteful. I thought we'd start by maybe you could talk to me about Habits of Waste, your organization.
Yeah, so Habits of Waste was born after I spearheaded the first plastic straw and cutlery ban in history, which was in the city of Malibu. And it was really after a huge organization I started initially called the Crayon Collection. And people were so confused about why I was doing straws and crayons that I said, okay, I've got to start another charity called Habits of Waste because it was all encompassing. My work really began through my background in sociology and understanding how human behavior is kind of malleable in the masses. I kept going to restaurants with my daughter and noticing every single table around me would get crayons and they'd get thrown in the garbage. And
Right.
I kept wondering, why are we doing this? This is such bizarre behavior where there's so many kids who have none at all. So I started the Crayon Collection where I asked restaurants to collect the crayons kids left behind, as well as families who had a ton of crayons at home and didn't know what to do with them. And I would pair them with an underserved Title I or Head Start school within 5 miles so that they could benefit from the crayons. And then we started a whole art education program by challenging artists to create project ideas using just crayons. So that was really the start of my whole work that led into Habits of Waste. And then it was in those restaurants that I saw the plastic straws and wondered, no one asked for those. We're just getting,
Right.
There's an imposition on us about stuff coming our way and we didn't even ask for it. So I thought we had to do something. And the city of Malibu, to me, was the most iconic beach city in the world. So there you have it.
Yeah. Well, so by the way, if you want to learn more about the Crayon Collection, it is crayoncollection.org. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And we're going to dive deeper into Habits of Waste. I do want to talk to you about that, but it's fascinating. I worked in a restaurant for 4 or 5 years throughout high school and thereafter a little bit. And I washing dishes, bussing tables, and waiting tables. But bussing tables especially, I was responsible for creating a lot of the waste. Now, of course, I didn't even think about it at the time either. This is just what we do. We hand out crayons, often when they don't even ask for them. It's just like, let's pacify some people. Of course, we hand out plastic straws. This is Dayton, Ohio in the 90s. So yeah, it was plastic everything and styrofoam everything even to go. And we just created all of this waste, but I didn't think about it at all. And I think maybe the message that I want to talk about with you today is, maybe it's just a question to start with. Why don't we even think about it? Why do we take all of this for granted and not realize what we're doing to the rest of the world?
I think there's an element of daily behaviors that get ingrained so deeply and so deep-rooted that they become normal. And I use normal lightly because, in my opinion, there's really no such thing as normal.
Right.
We create what normal is. And so my job is to highlight what it is that we're doing wrong that's normal now.
Yeah.
And most of the time, what's beautiful about it is that people believe strongly that the new ideas I might have are better, and they're not, even opposed to it. It's just a matter of seeing it, and then you can't unsee it, and that's when the change happens.
I think normal has become unintentional in many ways. When something is normalized, we take it for granted. We act as though it's always been that way. It's a tradition, even though it's lasted for 5, 10, 50 years. It's not this cultural imperative that has lasted throughout all of humanity, and yet because we grew up with it, we just assume that it's always supposed to be this way. We've got some questions here from our audience. I thought we'd go ahead and dive into those. Our first one is from Rachel in St. Louis, Missouri.
Sometimes I'm at odds with what to do with the things that I want to get rid of, especially clothing. I have a hard time sometimes giving to Goodwill and Salvation Army and places like that, because I know that any of their surplus sometimes, most likely ends up in other countries and messes up with their own economies. And I wanted to know if you have any suggestions for your listeners on where they can give their stuff to people in need. If there's places that they can look for in their own cities and towns that would actually benefit the people locally instead of abroad.
So Sheila, this is a fascinating question because I think a lot of people deal with this. Obviously, they regret the stuff they have now, or maybe the stuff was even useful for a period of time. It's no longer serving a purpose. It's no longer bringing them joy, and they don't want to put it in a storage locker in perpetuity. And so what do they do with it? And quite often the answer is, well, I guess I'll go to Goodwill, or even worse, I'll go to like the gas station. There's these little bins where you can throw clothes in there, and we're not really sure where it goes. It's just this hole that we take our stuff to. Mm-hmm. And I can understand the concern because it's not serving a purpose now, but she wants the stuff to maybe add value to someone else's life. What do you recommend to people like this? I mean, I know of a few resources that I've recommended in the past, but I'd love to know what you think about what people should do with their unwanted stuff.
Well, I have to say my new favorite thing to do with myself, my kids, is to go shopping at vintage clothing stores. And one of the best ways in kind of creating that beautiful array of choices is to consider selling your clothing that you don't need anymore to companies like RealReal. They'll give you the money for it. And I think that the money that I receive for most of my stuff, I give it back to larger charities that then are able to serve the population with many things. So it's almost like sometimes that really special pair of Levi's jeans might be worth way more money that you can make a bigger impact with by donating it to the charities that are out there to support, vulnerable families with the clothing and the needs that they might have. So I think there's a lot of value sometimes in the items that we have held on to for so long that the dollar amount might actually do more good. And then you're supporting a whole new industry that actually, I think, is something that the future of environmentalism is going to really be digging into, is that vintage clothing, secondhand shopping, don't buy new kind of thing. So I love that.
Yeah, my wife and I, there's a vintage shop we went to in Atwater Village maybe, a couple of years ago now, and I was just shocked by some of the pricing that these items demand, and it's because it is something that is vintage that someone wants. Of course, don't get caught up in the sunk cost fallacy. You may have paid $100 for a dress that is worth next to nothing now, and it's probably better to let it go if you can't sell it. My personal rule is a 30-day rule if I'm unable to sell something. Now, I like the consignment shop because RealReal is a consignment shop, right?
And some things aren't that expensive there too, by the way.
Right. And what I found is that even if I'm selling a piece of furniture or whatever, quite often consignment tends to be the best option because you're outsourcing that to someone else than if I were to just get on Craigslist or eBay. I know for the longest time, if anything was, I thought, worth more than $20, I would try to sell it on eBay, especially when I was trying to get out of debt because I wanted to get the money that I could from these resources I was no longer using so I could apply it to this debt and I could experience some freedom there. But by letting go of the stuff, eventually I realized that a lot of the things I couldn't sell at all. And so the resource that I often use if you're unable to sell it or if a consignment shop won't take it, there's a website called donationtown.org. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but you just go to the website and it will find local charities. Some of the big ones, of course, are going to be mentioned there, like Goodwill, Salvation Army, or whomever. But I found a lot of local charities where I've been able to donate stuff, even things like mattresses, where it's really hard to get rid of a mattress usually, but they'll use them for people who really need a mattress, or furniture, or different appliances, even clothes. You can go to donationtown.org. You can even find places that'll pick up larger items from your house, depending on what area you're in. You can do a sort of zip code search there, and I think that'll help you out a lot, Rachel.
And one more thing I can also add is a lot of the schools that we've served in the past, the families there are many families who are homeless actually, and if they're under this Title I kind of bracket, many of the families are living under the poverty line. So the principals of those schools tend to accept things. So in your local area, at crayoncollection.org, we actually have a school finder where you just enter the zip code and you can go in and find either a Head Start school or a Title I school, and you can contact them, and they will most of the time take almost everything that you've got. There's so much need out there. It's unbelievable. But if, like you said, if the good stuff gets sold, take the money and donate it to the charities that can then do more with it. But if you can't sell it and it's something that, you can donate locally, I highly recommend checking out your Title I schools nearby.
When my mother passed, it was my first foray into minimalism, and a lot of her things I knew I couldn't sell. They weren't worth anything, and so I was able to donate those to friends and family locally. But there were a few things I was able to sell, and I took that money and gave it to the 2 charities that helped Mom through her chemo and radiation treatments. And so, paying it back or paying it forward in a way to help other people in need. Yeah, I think that's really important. And the school thing, it's a need we don't even think about. But of course, it would make sense that they have the means to redistribute there and to people who are actually in need. So it's not just going somewhere that's going to be stored in a warehouse forever. Rachel, I'm going to send you a copy of our book, Essential. It's an essay collection, and it really talks about being intentional. One of the essays in there is about clothing. It's called The Favorite Clothes of a Minimalist, but it really talks about being intentional with the things we bring into our life, because then we have fewer things we have to try to sell or let go in the future if we're really intentional about with what we bring into our lives. So we'll send you a copy of Essential if you want the ebook or the audiobook version. Those are the most sustainable versions, I think you would argue. Then we'll be happy to send those to you. Also, if you want the print book, we're happy to send that to you as well, Rachel. Thanks for your question. Carolyn in Toledo has a question.
One issue I'm having is receiving physical junk mail, and I'm hoping for some suggestions. I'd rather prevent the junk mail from coming, but I also don't think I should waste my precious time emailing and calling companies to ask to be removed from their lists over and over again. So I'm kind of at a loss here. Here's what I've already tried. I went to my local post office and spoke with a person who basically put off my request not to receive the flyers or items addressed to, quote, current resident. I reasserted myself, saying that I wanted to register a request in writing, and was told that the conversation that we were having was all that could be done, that I was registering a complaint simply by talking to him, even though he didn't even know my name and wouldn't take my name or address. He basically indicated that the post office gets paid to shuffle around junk, so I get the impression that they will not stop. So I've taken to writing the words refused, return to sender on junk mail and putting it back in my outbox. We'll see how it goes. So my question at this point is twofold. One, how do you prevent junk mail from arriving? And two, if it does arrive, how do you handle it?
So, Sheila, I've done some things rather aggressively on this front. I'm not sure what you've done. I'd love to hear about it, but talk about wasteful. We get so much junk mail. I know whenever I move, especially, it's like the mailboxes are just teeming with a bunch of things that no one ever really asked for. But it is probably the thing that strangely keeps the post office operating. I don't know what percentage, but it's probably upwards of 90% of their volume is what you and I would perceive as junk mail, either credit card offerings, catalogs we never wanted, direct mailers, etc. So let's talk about this, because she has 2 questions here. How do you prevent it, and then how do you handle it if it does show up? What do you do in your life?
Well, there's a website, and I have to give you the website name.
I think I probably have it here.
Okay.
This is from our website. If you go to theminimalists.com/day15, we're probably talking about the same thing, but this is the Direct Marketing Association, dmachoice.org. But they stop the catalogs and the junk mail. I won't say immediately, but they stop 85 to 90% of it pretty quickly.
Good. Yes. So that was going to be my first suggestion, is to get in there and communicate. But the other thing is, for a period of time, I was getting almost like a Yellow Pages size book from Restoration Hardware. Yeah. And I never asked for that. And I kept on asking, just like, this person just called and saying, it's my life that I'm spending my time calling and saying, please don't send me this. But believe it or not, if you take a picture of that and post it on social media and tag the company and say, I don't want this anymore, or this is so wasteful, pass it on. I think that they're listening out there. Those big companies do not want that kind of exposure, but we need to also communicate what the end user like us appreciates or doesn't, and really make it clear. And I think that if enough people were to start doing that, they're going to have to start thinking differently. I don't receive the Restoration Hardware book anymore, so I think that worked. But
right. By the way, they don't want to send it to you if you absolutely don't want it anyway. That costs them a lot of money to be able to send that big, thick book. If you hate it and they know it's just going to be a piece of trash, not only do they have to pay to print the thing, they have to pay to ship it to you. Definitely. And if it's creating a poor customer experience, they don't want to do that.
I totally believe in consumers like us speaking up, because in all honesty, we are the ones that have the power. It's just that many of us forget that we actually have the power.
Yeah. Well, Caroline, I'm going to give you one other website here. It's optoutprescreen.com. That prevents the major credit card bureaus from sending you solicitations, basically. So both of these websites, I believe they require some identity verification last time I did it. So you can't just go on there and you have to prove that you are you, so you can opt out from these catalogs and these junk mail offers. It doesn't eliminate 100%, but the second part of her question is, how do you handle it when they show up? Well, I use an app for this. It's called Paper Karma. And it has been great. And I think it costs maybe 99 cents a month, but it's like the best dollar I spend a month. So anytime I do get junk mail, which is much less than it was before because of dmachoice.org and optoutprescreen.com, anytime I get junk mail, I just open the app. I take a photo of it. I don't even have to do anything. I take a photo, hit enter, and it automatically unsubscribes me from that piece of paper. And that company no longer sends me stuff. So I'm not getting stuff from Capital One. I'm not getting the current resident things anymore. It's been really helpful. So Paper Karma, I would encourage you to check that out. And for your question, thank you so much, Carolyn. I'm going to send you a copy of my favorite book of ours. It's called Everything That Remains. It's a memoir about when Ryan and I first embraced minimalism, the 5-year journey from being these suit and tie corporate guys to becoming the minimalist. It's my favorite thing we've ever done. If you like our podcast, I think you'll really like the audiobook version of Everything That Remains. Or if you want, we'll send you the ebook or the book version of that book. Monica in Redlands, California has a question for us.
I work in TV production, and we're always having new technology coming in. So I'm always having this old technology that has cost us thousands of dollars, but I don't know what to do with it. I have old wires, old USBs. I have a whole storage area. So I would love to know, how do I bring my minimalist lifestyle to my workplace? I'm the head of a department, and I don't know what to do with all this old junk. Yeah, it's old technology. No one uses it, but we spent thousands of dollars on it. It's hard to just donate it or do like an e-waste donation.
So Monica's question here is a little bit. We touched upon the sunk cost fallacy a moment ago, and yes, maybe some of this TV equipment cost thousands of dollars before, but the iPhone 1 cost you $1,000 a decade ago, and it's worth functionally nothing now, right? But it doesn't mean that we should be irresponsible with the things that we want to get rid of. Is there something you recommend specifically to people who have electronics that you don't want them to just throw them in the trash, obviously?
The first thing that comes to my mind is my son, actually. And he is 10 years old, and he is just dying to expose himself to any electronics that he can, and he wants to open everything up and learn about it and take it apart. So because of COVID, we've been able to get this really great mechanical engineer student from UC Santa Barbara, who he can't go to school now. So he comes over and they take stuff apart.
Oh, wow.
And they look at it and they learn from it and they build new things. And I really feel like there's a huge market right there, like a little business, a little side thing where these kids can learn and go in and basically take stuff apart. And students in high school and in college and all these places, those are kind of like gems for them, those older things. And I just think it's such a learning opportunity right there. These kids go nuts for it. And what they're creating out of these older pieces is just mind-blowing. Yeah,
I remember that age in particular, somewhere around 9, 10, 11, like I just wanted to take things apart. Yeah. And there's something innate that we want to dive into the thing, and so there's a lot of opportunity there. At age 40 now, it's not something that I'm as keen on doing, right? But it's something that I think is really fascinating to kids. Now, of course, if you have the stuff and you want to get rid of it, you can't find somewhere to take it. You don't know where to take it. I think the EPA has a good resource on this. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Sean, I sent you the link this morning, but they have basically a bunch of different centers and places you can take your different electronics, and it lists even by brand. So I don't know what brand these are, but say you had a bunch of Xerox copy machines, it gives you instructions on how you can contact Xerox or different places that Xerox machines would be taken. and you can figure that out locally. So I think if you have electronics, and obviously we don't just want to throw them away, if you can find a place that recycles batteries, I know like local Best Buys and things like that recycle batteries. The building we're in actually recycles batteries, so anytime I have extra batteries from home that we end up using, they recycle them here. And yes, it's much less convenient than just throwing them in the trash, but it's a much better thing to do.
Please don't throw them in the trash.
Yes, exactly. So we'll put a link to that EPA.gov site and in the show notes. I think you'll find some value in that, but other people will as well if you have electronics that you want to donate. And Monica, also, the other thing I'm going to talk about here, since we're talking about electronics, is Ryan and I have something called the upgrade rule, or what you might call the don't upgrade rule. Because one of the ways that we create a bunch of electronic waste is what? We feel the constant impulse, the tug to always buy the new thing, even if the old thing is still working perfectly fine. And yes, I know there's sort of planned obsolescence in there, but even without that, we see the commercial, we see the billboard, and I must have the new iPhone 13 or 14 or whatever it is now, when my iPhone 6 is working just fine. And so I'm going to send you a copy of our minimalist rule book. It's 16 rules for living with less. One of those rules is the don't upgrade rule. And we talk about there are 3 options that you can do whenever you feel that impulse to upgrade. And by the way, that just came out as an audio book as well. The ebook is free if you go to theminimalists.com/rulebook, or if you want the audio book, you can find it there as well. All right, I'm going to move on to our lightning round. Now, Sheila, this is where we answer readers or listeners text messages. They text their questions to 937-202-4654, and those texts go to both Ryan's and my phone, and occasionally we answer them just via text message. We also answer some questions here on the podcast, and we reply to as many people as we can. We obviously can't get to everyone, but during the lightning round, here's what we try to do. We try to answer questions with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response.
Okay.
But not really. We can maunder on a bit, and Sean will tweeze out something beautiful and pithy that we can share on social media if you like. Carlos has a question for us. What are my recycling options if I live in a city without a robust recycling program? And some examples here: Las Vegas, where Carlos lives; Missoula, where I used to live, Missoula, Montana. They had a terrible recycling program. In fact, I wondered if they were just throwing it away and calling it recycling. They didn't recycle glass. They hardly recycled anything. And so it was just difficult. I guess the because Missoula is so remote, the cost of recycling there, it didn't make sense financially for a for-profit business. And I'm interested to hear what you have to say on this because, another place I live, Phillipsburg, Montana, which is truly in the middle of nowhere. You basically had to take your own trash to the trash dump. There was no recycling center anywhere within 100 miles of where I was. Now, that is a remote place. Well, let's take that off the table. But for smaller places, or even places like Las Vegas that don't have a robust recycling program, what do you recommend to people?
Well, first of all, why doesn't Las Vegas have a robust recycling program is my question.
Yes.
That's what I'd like to know. And I think that's where my mind goes is like, go to your city council meeting, start talking, speak up. That should change right away. Las Vegas is not a small town in Montana like you just described, so there's really no reason for that if you ask me.
Yeah.
But that's just the way that I think immediately is that change needs to happen and the ball needs to start rolling right there.
Yeah.
First and foremost. Secondly, if we're talking about plastics, unfortunately to me, plastic recycling is like a big old farce. It's not even happening.
Oh, wow.
We're at 9% right now, and some say it's really 3%. So many times...
Can I just stop you there? When you say we're at 9%, is that 9% of the, say, we take 100 plastic bottles and put them in the recycling, only 9 of them are being recycled?
Yes, correct.
Why is that?
Just because there's, like you said, there's so much, first of all. There's 1 million plastic bottles being thrown away per minute in America alone. So that is a massive, massive quantity, A. And B, it's not like cans and glassware that actually when you recycle it, it comes out just as good as new. it degrades so much that it's just not worth it. So many times people feel this like sense of kind of like comfort. I'm going to drink this drink in my plastic water bottle, I'll put it in the recycling bin, and it'll get recycled. But it's not. It's actually not. So we really don't believe in recycling plastic at Habits of Waste. We believe in refusing plastic altogether.
Yes.
We just don't think that it's even worth attempting to recycle plastic. So it's not going to, you're not going to make change unless you just refuse it.
Yeah.
And that's not even talking about the clamshells and cutlery and all that stuff. That's definitely not going to get recycled.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So with the straws in particular, that was the thing that was near and dear to your heart. Obviously, it's a piece of plastic. You're not anti-straw, you're anti-plastic straw. You can have metal straws, and you're totally fine with that, I assume. But there are options for us. We're allowed to say no to some of these things. And I think, again, this is something we don't think about up front. We're able to say, you know what? No, I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to say no to it. And by the way, if the business that you're buying from refuses you, then you can refuse to do business with them. We get to vote with our wallets.
That's right. And I really think the mindset shift is right there. It's like, instead of thinking of so much about recycling, how can we stop it from the beginning? How can we just, turn off the tap and not even have this problem is my goal, really.
Yeah. Well, that dovetails perfectly into my pithy answer here. The most sustainable purchase is the one that's left on the shelf. I think quite often we don't think about that. It's like, well, do I get this plastic thing or this plastic thing? And which one's better for the environment?
Neither.
Well, yeah, right, exactly. And what can I do? Now, of course, there are things now. You may have plastic in your home, and it's unfortunate. You have a bunch of plastic maybe you want to get rid of. And it's one of the reasons that I really dislike places like the Container Store, for example, because it does two things really wrong, I think. One is I think organizing is just well-planned hoarding. So it doesn't actually deal with the problem of consumerism and overindulgent consumption. But second, it creates all this additional waste, plastic waste, as well. And so it's this, I get it. I understand the need to want to be organized, but that's probably not the best route to take. The best way to organize your stuff is to let go of most of it. And the best way to let go is, of course, not to bring it in the first place.
You see these beautiful pantries on Instagram of like different snacks and this and that, and it's literally a glorification of plastic. All that packaging, all those plastic bins. Like, let's rewind and just get back to like the core problem. Why are we buying all those prepackaged individual snacks to put in a plastic container B? Let's start from the beginning. Can we do things differently altogether?
And so how do we do things differently? What are some of the alternatives when, instead of saying, well, of course, it's going to be really difficult to get to zero plastic. You're not advocating an all or nothing strategy. It's about a radical reduction in the amount of plastic we let in. But how do we do that? What are the alternatives?
Buy in bulk, number one. Rather than buying individual packaged bags of chips for your kids' lunches, maybe I understand we're all human beings. We love those goodies. Get one big one and then use reusable containers to divvy it up. You get so much less waste that way. That's just one example. Another one is it's really fun to try and make recipes like your own granola, your own bars, your own fruit leathers. There's a lot of opportunities right now, especially since many people are still at home, to create recipes that are just fun to do with your kids, and you just create them with so much less waste.
Yeah. I'm thinking about our home, and we have some glass containers, reusable. I think the key to the reusables is actually reusing them, because sometimes good intentions are, I'm going to buy these reusable things, but it's actually worse for the environment if you buy something and then you just don't reuse it. You end up throwing it away or discarding it relatively quickly. Can you talk about that?
We have some jars, like you said. I buy like pickle jars or some different pickles or whatever it is, like a glass jar. And those are my to-go containers. So I leave them in my car if I'm going to a restaurant, and I'll take them in and I'll refill them with the food that I would have otherwise asked for a to-go box. And it's going to be either polystyrene or plastic or even aluminum with a plastic lid. Or if I have leftovers at home and I want to pass it out to like friends and family, I fill those up and I pass it out like that. And they can continue living just, constantly. I might make green juice at home and fill those jars up with the juice. So it is so beautiful to go and buy these amazing bottles and this and that. You don't really need to. My water bottle is a tomato sauce jar, actually, and it's a beautiful bottle. It's a company called Muti, and I tagged them, and I was like, these can be really great water bottles afterwards. So they started reposting, and who said a water bottle needs to be branded to you as a water bottle?
Yeah. By the way, just thinking about that term branding, it's I think of branding as a pejorative. I don't want to wear a bunch of logos on my clothes. It's free I paid someone for the privilege of advertising on my body. Or aren't we doing the same thing with these fancy sports bottles or whatever? And in a weird way, we're trying to indicate something about ourselves, who we are as a person through this brand. But of course, we can never accomplish that. I think the last thing I want to touch on with Carlos's question here is, I think it may even seem overly simplistic to say, but the less we consume, the less waste we produce. And I want to think about that, because as a minimalist, environmentalism was not the primary objective for me when we first started simplifying, but it was this beautiful byproduct of consuming less stuff. There was less packaging, less waste, less things to donate or throw away or try to sell. It was maybe the best unintended benefit of living with less.
I mean, to be really honest with you, my goal is to do what you guys do and empty my house of all the stuff that I've accumulated over the years. But I started to buy less from, maybe a few years back. But I still can't figure out what to do with a lot of the stuff. So I find myself finding solutions as I go, and that's how I reduce what I have in my possession now. But the goal is to get to the place where you're at already. So good for you.
All right, before we get into our listener tips and our added value segment today, it looks like we got a bunch more surprise questions this week. Like, do paper straws really help? Are solar panels bad for the environment? Is there a checklist for greener living? Plus, we got questions about digital waste. We've got questions about food waste. We've got questions about regulation versus personal responsibility and environmentally friendly brands and clothing and composting and a million more questions about waste for Sheila. And if you want to hear all that, subscribe to our Maximal episodes on the Minimalists private podcast. It's a completely separate podcast, and it's the most honest way for the minimalists to earn an income, because we don't believe in advertisements. By the way, if you're not a private podcast subscriber, you're literally missing 2/3 of our show. Let me talk to you about this for a second. I know that money can be tight right now, but we spend exorbitant amounts of money on random things. We waste our money on things that don't give us commensurate value. We'll spend $3 for a cup of coffee. We'll spend $10 on a meal that wasn't that good. It's just money here, money there, everywhere we go. But we want to provide a service to you that you're going to value. It's worth way more than the $2 that it costs. It keeps this podcast 100% advertisement free, but it's really the second 2/3 of the show, but it's also a private podcast, which means it's a private space where Ryan and I and our guests, we really work out a bunch of different ideas. We're able to talk about things we don't talk about in public. And if you haven't tried it out, I'll just say this, you're missing out. Try it out for a week. Try it out for a month. Listen to our private podcast, theminimalists.com/support. That way you can get a personal link if you subscribe. It'll play in your favorite podcast app. So if you listen on Apple Podcasts or on Overcast or Feedly or any of these other places where you listen to podcasts, you get a personal link so that our private podcast plays in your favorite podcast app. And by the way, these are longer episodes, they're deeper dives, and it just gives us the private space that we need to mess up without doing so in public. I think you'll enjoy these conversations a lot. By the way, I would encourage you to start with, when you subscribe, we give you our 12 most popular episodes there, a list of those. But there was one recently that I really enjoyed. It was called Yes is More. And I would encourage you to check out that episode. That's a great place to start. It was just me and Ryan, but man, that conversation conversation flowed. The Patreon comments on that were phenomenal. Oh, by the way, you also get access to our entire Patreon community there, where you interact with over 5,000 other supporters of the podcast. You get to answer questions, you get to talk to each other, we interact with you there. That is the main place where Ryan and I interact with other people. Yes, you can text us or tweet us or whatever, and we get back to some of you when you do that, but on Patreon, we respond to everyone because this is our core audience. These are the people that really support what we do. They get what we do. They give us the space that we need to produce this podcast and make it meaningful for others. And I wish you could hear some of these Patreon episodes, these private podcast episodes. And you can. It's just a couple bucks, and you'll get way more than your $2 worth. So thank you so much if you are a Patreon supporter. We appreciate it. If you want to become a supporter, theminimalists.com/support. All right, here are some voicemail comments and tips from our listeners.
Hi, this is Molly from Salt Lake City. I'm calling with a tip regarding managing the collecting impulse. One strategy I have used is to make friends with people who share the same hobby or collection and do regular exchanges with them. So you get the thrill of having a new item, but then when the thrill wears off, you just return it to the other owner and you can get another new item when you get it back.
Hi, this is Tara from Seattle, and I was just calling in reference to Molly when she was talking about her trophies. One cool thing that I did was I took all the little nameplates off and I kept them all like in a scrapbook. You could do that, or you could even put them in a shadow box with your medals, or just set them up and take a really cool picture and then keep that. Otherwise, chuck the trophies and, just enjoy the memories, but let them go.
All right, y'all. Thanks again to Sheila for joining us today. I encourage you to check out her organization. It is called Habits of Waste. You can find it at habitsofwaste.org. Also, the Crayon Collection, crayoncollection.org. Check that out. She talked about that at the top of the episode. Follow them on social media, Hal Changes, on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Hal Changes, so Habits of Waste, Hal Changes on all the social media platforms. For our added value segment this week, there's a new single by our friend Canyon City. It is a phenomenal song. It is called Wish List. I think we're going to end this episode with it, with his permission. Although if you're watching on YouTube, you'll probably hear every little thing. But maybe we can put a link to it in the show description, Jordan. This new song is called Wish List. The reason I thought of it for this episode is he filmed it. It's a beautiful video. So if you get a chance, check out the video on YouTube. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. But speaking of environmentalism or lack of waste, he filmed this in one of the most beautiful places in America, in Colorado, and it's stunning. It looks like an environmentalist's dream. He's just out there in the middle of the forest playing his guitar with babbling brooks and giant pine trees, and it's a beautiful video for a beautiful song. So I hope you enjoy that. Canyon City's new single, Wish List, which I believe is part of an EP that will be coming out later this year. And real quick for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalist. So I want to give you a free ebook. It's called 11 Ways to Write Better. Now, we are all writers now. You might write corporate emails. You might want to write a book. You might write tweets or text messages, but we are all writers. And maybe you're aspiring to do something better with that writing. Well, I want to give you 11 tips for free. It's over on my website, howtowritebetter.org. That will also take you to the class that I teach 2 or 3 times a year called How to Write Better. It's closed right now. We usually accept about 100 students at a time, currently going through a class right now. But when that opens back up, if you're interested, you can get on the email list. But if not, you can still get the free ebook. It's 11 Ways to Write Better. I want to show you how to write better, whether it's your texts or blog posts, or you want to write the great American novel, or you just want to improve your business emails. I believe the rising tide lifts all boats. And I'll show you how to write better over at howtowritebetter.org. You can follow The Minimalists on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Minimalists. Come see one of our live podcast shows. Visit theminimalists.com/tour to find a city near you. If you have a question, comment, or minimalism tip for our podcast, email a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. You can comment on this episode at youtube.com/theminimalists. And if you want our show notes in your inbox, sign up for our email list over at theminimalists.com. You'll also receive our Simple Sunday emails each week. By the way, if you want to get our Monday morning minimal maxims texted right to your phone, send us a text, 937-202-4654. Just text an emoji of the thing you got rid of most recently, or just text a smiley face there. We'll add you to our Monday morning minimal maxims. Each week we start your week off with a bit of simplicity. Never any spam, never any junk, never any advertisements, obviously. But if you leave here today with just one message, we hope it's this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all. We'll see you next time.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.